now?
Yes, I can. Can
Okay.
you? Yeah.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you heard me, but hello. We are I'm gonna just fill in for Jessie here just to get things started while she's at work. So we're gonna let you run with the show, and we'll do all of our chapter business afterwards.
Okay, so are we ready to go?
We are ready whenever you are.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
And let me get a full screen. Ka-ching. And change the pointer to laser. Okay, so everyone can hear and see. Okay, so if we don't have problems like last time. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm glad it's actually kind of at least raining here in Montgomery County, because that means there are more people aren't outside gardening. So I'm really excited to make this presentation, about trees, which are so important to our yards and to our ecosystems. So the presentation, a PDF of this presentation, and just several links that I'll talk about as I go through will be available on my website, which is marcmradell.com. That address will be up during the Q&A session. I should have put it on this slide too, but they'll send it out with the meeting minutes. And then you'll go to that homepage and click on this link here, and it will open a new page. And down here with that links and attachments will be a copy of the presentation and live links, everything I go through here. And then I'll post it later tomorrow, probably, because inevitably when I run through these things, I see that I made some misspellings or should make things clearer based upon questionings. So I'll post it sometime tomorrow, but it'll definitely be up by the end of the day tomorrow. So today what we're going to talk about, first we're going to have a general overview of tree biology. My dog is very excited about this talk, excuse me. Be a good boy. We're going to have an overview of tree biology, just focusing on things that are unique to trees, because, we discussed in the past general principles of plant botany and plant biology. So this is just going to focus on a few key things that we should keep in mind when we're dealing with trees. Then we'll talk about trees' role in the ecosystem, how to select the right trees for your home landscape, and planting and maintaining trees. Attached to the presentation, which we do not have time to go through the whole thing tonight, was an appendix with recommended species for Southeast Pennsylvania. And so I'll give you an overview of that, show you the content in there, but there's a description of all these different trees grouped by genus. But we're focusing on this part of the presentation tonight. And if we ever decide in the future that we just want to go through these, we can do that, being familiar with the material in the first part. So first of all, what is a tree? We talk about it, but what is it? A tree is not a unique botanical or taxonomic group, the way when we talk about things like angiosperms and gymnosperms, flowering plants and non-flowering plants. Those are botanically defined taxonomic groups. Trees are not that. They're a growth form or habit of woody plants. And what distinguishes them from shrubs, which are also woody plants, is that they have a central dominant stem, which we call the trunk. It's usually just one, but even if it has multiple stems, there's usually like a dominant one. And it's generally taller than 15 feet. There's exceptions to every rule. This is sort of like, an informal, rule, but that's generally what most people consider to be a tree, is these two factors, the central stem and taller than 15 feet. Both tree and shrub forms can occur within the same species. An example of that would be something like American witch hazel, which can either be a small tree or a shrub. And a lot of times what determines that is the placement, whether it's growing in a woodland setting where it's competing for sunlight with other plants, to other trees, then a lot of times it will form into a tree. I've had that happen on my property with, as the larger trees, the canopies grow, that have had some of the shrubs, particularly, American witch hazel, kind of that started as a multi-stem shrub, turn into a small tree just with a single trunk, like about 4 inches in diameter, and it's at least 20 feet high. When you walk by it, you think it's a tree until you look up and see the leaves. So again, that is what defines a tree. It's not a botanical or taxonomic group. I mentioned woody, so then what's a woody plant? A woody plant, what distinguishes a woody plant from an herbaceous plant, that dies down every year. Woodies persist over the winter. What enables them to do that is woody plant tissue, which is a type of the xylem, which is one of the conductive plant tissues within a plant that is strengthened by an organic polymer called lignin. There's a bit of lignin even in most herbaceous plants, but it's not formed as much. And another thing that really distinguishes woody plants from herbaceous plants is because they live more than 1 year, they have not just primary growth, like a single growth period or season like herbaceous plants, but they have multiple growth periods each year. It's a growth period. So that secondary xylem forms in the second, year of the plants, the woody plant, and then in the third year and the fourth year, etc. But that forms after the first growth spurt of the green wood. This is the primary growth that is comparable to herbaceous growth. Toward the end of the fall, the secondary xylem that you can see how the vascular tissues in woody plants are arranged in rings instead of in bundles like they are with this cross section of an herbaceous plant. They're arranged in rings. Well, this secondary xylem here gets lignified as it thickens. And then eventually, like by late fall and over the winter, it actually turns woody and then sort of brittle. And that's what makes a plant woody. And that's what enables it to grow taller and to survive, into the next year. So that's what distinguishes a woody plant from an herbaceous plant. And what's interesting, like when we look at a mature trunk, we all know like there's one ring for each year. That pith, that's that first year, that little tiny dark dot in the middle, that's that primary growth, that first year. So it's kind of neat when you look like even an ancient tree and you see that little dot right in the middle. That's what that is. The basic parts of a tree, like all, plants, they have leaves, and we talked about stems and stuff. The basic parts, when we're, especially if you're talking to like an arborist or somebody's coming over and, expecting you to know things, so we know what the trunk is. It's that big central stem. And then the part of the trunk that is below the main branches, the crown of the tree, which is the main branches with the foliage and the flowers or the cones, depending what kind of tree it is, that unbranched portion of the trunk is called the bole. And so you may hear people talk about that. Another important term to keep in mind is flare. That's where the trunk flares out to make the roots. And it doesn't always flare out. Most of the times it does, but not in every tree species. Flare actually got its origin from flaring of the trunk. A lot of times we talk about root flares, which is the same thing, but that's what the flare means. And, I think the reason we talk about the root flare is because the trunk doesn't always flare out. But when you talk about the root flare, it's where the uppermost root meets the trunk. And then a limb is a branch that goes right onto the main trunk, and then a branch goes off on a limb, and there can be branches and branches and branchlets, and the final terminal tiny branches are the twigs. So those are some of the basic things that you might hear, when you're talking about trees or, discussing with a landscape architect or horticulturalist or somebody. So trees are just incredible. They're, hundreds of feet tall, some of them. So how does all that, how do they circulate everything within that vascular tissue? Like all plants, the fluids go up in the xylem, and that's mostly water carrying minerals and stuff through the roots up towards the leaves and everything where the photosynthesis occurs. And then the sugar travels back down. in spring, the sugar that is stored down here in the trunk can also travel upward in the xylem. And the way that that's enabled over those hundreds of feet is down here, like where it enters, the fluids enter the root. That's sort of like a general osmosis, just traveling across the cell membranes. And then up at the top, we have the moisture like coming out through transpiration and a little bit of evaporation off the leaf surfaces, but transpiration through the pores. And then, so it's this slight draw at the top and this osmosis at the bottom, but then it's the cohesion of the water particles to each other, molecules to each other, and adhesion to the xylem walls. And then these sort of like little backflow valves, almost like at the cell wall ends of the xylem, that enables it to go up those tremendous distances. So that's, what really, how that woody tissue really helps trees grow so high, is it gives them the strength to have this kind of vascular tissue for the tremendous length that it has to go up and back down. An important thing is like to understand is the different types of tree roots, especially when we start talking about different root systems that different species might have, and it affects how we plant them and how we grow them. All plants basically start with a taproot, that single root that comes out of the seed and goes downward. Most of the time, that taproot is outgrown by other roots. Most often by these lateral roots that grow parallel to the surface of the soil and often close to the surface of the soil. And those also lend the tree a lot of lateral strength. And like the taproots and just about all the roots, they can absorb water and nutrients from the soil. So oblique roots or heart roots are very similar to lateral roots, but instead of growing sort of parallel to the surface, they grow down in, together they can form sort of like a heart or spherical shape. But they have the same basic purpose as a lateral root. Now, lateral roots and oblique roots send down these things called sinker roots. And those are really designed to help, increase the stability of the tree, but also to get down to the deeper nutrients and water in deeper soils. So much of it depends upon the exact site and the exact, formation of the soil and the rock beneath it that each individual tree is growing in. Then fine roots can grow off any of these other type of roots. And that's where most of the interactions take place, most of the absorption of nutrients from the soil and water, and also where most of the interactions with soil organisms take place. In some trees, a lot of roots, but not all species have them, root hairs, which are extensions of the epidermal cells of individual cells of the roots. It's really kind of amazing. So you can't see them. If you see little tiny white roots, a lot of people think those are the root hairs. Those are not. Those are just very fine roots. These are microscopic. They just come off a single cell. But that's where so much of the action happens, with absorbing nutrients and, interacting with microscopic organisms in the soil. Most tree roots actually grow in the top 3 feet of the soil. There's this common misconception. In fact, it's almost impossible to find clip art, which I like to use a lot in my presentations, of a tree that looks like a tree really looks. Most often you see, these things like this. This is what we think of, but most often the tree roots are in the top 3 feet of soil. Think how hard it is for us to dig down more than even like a foot in most of our yards, and then tree roots having to work their way down through the crevices. But it's also where most of the oxygen, the water, and the nutrients are located, as well as I mentioned, the physical constraints of a lot of times the rocky substrate. So those are basically the different kinds of roots. I mentioned that different tree species have different kinds of root systems. Now, these taproot systems are very stable, but they're kind of rare because they're not really energy efficient for the tree to produce. So the example like hickory, sweet gum, black gum, the walnuts, and some of the oaks and pines have these taproot systems. They're not as energy efficient for the tree to produce as these lateral root systems, which are shallower. These, like, a lot of times you have to like really drive down into the soil and be thicker and everything. And then they cover a smaller lateral area. So these are actually more efficient for a tree to produce. So most of the tree species have this kind, and they get their stability from, that great area that they cover, as well as interlocking with other roots of other trees, like in woodland settings. So these taproot systems, there are a few things that have to know with these species. They're very hard to transplant. So you got to get them while they're young, like even an oak, seedling after a year or two can be extremely difficult to dig out down that deep, that root. And so also, if you do start these things from seeds, you got to make sure they're in deep, narrow pots. And also that when you get them, you don't let them sit like for years in that pot, because you don't want that taproot getting to the bottom of the pot and coiling around, because it's going to be very difficult then for the tree root system to grow properly if that happens. So like I said, most of the trees have this lateral root system. Some do have that heart-shaped system, which it's sort of like, it's like a counterweight to all the massive plant tissue above. And it's called a heart root system because it, sort of heart-shaped, or like a ball. But like a ball in a socket, it's fairly, prone to toppling, because that the tree trunk can move back and forth like a ball and socket joint. And so these trees are more prone to toppling, especially in wet soils, where there's not as much support coming from the soil. And trees that have that type of root system are red oak, American sycamore, and honey locust. So speaking of soil and relationships with things in the soil, it's a good idea for us to understand mycorrhiza, because we hear that bandied about a lot. Mycorrhiza itself is a relationship, an association between a fungus and a plant's root. It literally means myco is fungus and rhiza is root. A lot of people talk about mycorrhiza like that is the fungus. It's not. There are mycorrhizal fungi, but a mycorrhiza itself is the actual symbiotic sort of relationship. So the fungus colonizes the host root exterior, or sometimes even the interior. It's extremely complicated, and I'm not going to get more involved in that. Not that I necessarily understand much more than that, but that's all that we kind of generally need to know. Mycorrhizal relationships, good. They're usually mutualistic, where the fungi are providing water and mineral nutrients from the soil and from decomposed biological matter to the tree in exchange for sugars that, like trees are the only things, plants are the only things that can turn, sunlight into energy. And so they're passing these sugars down to the fungi in exchange for water and mineral nutrients. And it's at that really minute level. Even, when the trees are big and the fungi, they can have massive systems themselves. It really gets down to like the cellular level, the actual interchanges. And so another thing that's important is like the diversity. The more like plants, trees are in a community with other species, including, a lot of people think of mycorrhiza as being associations just between trees and fungi. Herbaceous plants have those relationships too. And, sometimes the relationships, the herbaceous plants need a specific kind of mycorrhizal fungi, the same as the trees do. But so the herbaceous plants may need to be planted near that type of tree. An example is some of the terrestrial orchids, like some of the lady slipper orchids need to be planted near like beeches or sugar maples. I know that the yellow lady slippers that, like I have some in my woods, they need to be with sugar maples and beech trees and maybe a few other species. So the diversity of terrestrial plants really promotes the diversity of the fungi. And so the more that you have, sort of the more the merrier. You can see this maple tree has more, that root system is bad, having just shown you that, but it just shows you the limitations of clip art. That it has more species of mycorrhizal fungi because it is associating with more trees. So it's a better overall community. Some mycorrhizal fungi have above ground fruiting bodies that we know as mushrooms, not all of them do. And then this is just sort of an example of how some of them can have these like networks. The fungi themselves form these networks between the plants. So the nutrients from these plants, the sugars can actually travel between the plants, which is really kind of fascinating. So in a healthy forest system, a lot of the plants, the trees are actually exchanging nutrients, supporting each other, indirectly, that's not intentional. It's nature's system, but the trees aren't actually willing the other trees to live. Because sometimes you read some pop articles that makes it sound like that. But definitely it's really important to have the diversity, because the more diversity you have above ground, the more you get below ground, and everybody's healthier. So trees can host multiple species at sometimes. Some of the mycorrhizal fungi can be generalists, where they'll serve multiple species, and some of them are specialists, where they're only with a particular species or genus. And then this isn't the only way that trees communicate. Again, when I say communicate, it's not like something that's like a conscious thing. It's the same way like a room communicates with another, a garage communicates with a house. It means that they just have a form of, exchanging, like in this case, chemicals. These chemical signals can be airborne or soil-borne. Like for instance, like if a caterpillar is munching on the leaves of one tree, that tree can release some chemicals that then, get floating through the air. And then if this tree picks up on it in certain circumstances, it will produce those chemicals, stimulate this tree to produce more like, chemicals that to ward off the attack of the insect. So if this one's getting bitten, this one is just like strengthening in order, so if the insect comes over there, it's not as susceptible. So that's one form of communication. And then I talked before about how the tree roots can like interlock. Well, sometimes they actually naturally graft together, even roots of different species. It's not that uncommon for them to graft together, and they actually exchange nutrients, and their circulatory systems are directly connected. It's a very small part of the overall circulatory system of a large tree, but it's still significant. And in fact, trees like sassafras and black gum and some of the cherries that sucker freely from the roots, some of the above ground, some of the trees are actually considered short-lived, because the parent tree, it forms these colonies, these clonal colonies of, little trees from its roots. Well, the whole scheme is then that eventually the parent plant will die, but then all that energy goes to these other plants from the roots. And then the whole colony, the whole species survives much better. You have more bigger trees. And then they, in turn, when they get larger, they create other colonies, and it spreads that way. So natural root grafting can occur, even between different species. That's another way of communicating. And this is very unusual, but it can happen. Sometimes you do see two tree trunks fused together, and that's called inosculation. And it can happen either branches or trunks where they touch and they actually fuse together, and also, but it's pretty rare, and it's very rare between species, though it's not unknown. Speaking of short-lived trees, which we just did, in tree longevity, now trees are not kind of like don't have a planned obsolescence, sort of like animals, including humans, do, where it's part of our genetic makeup that we have finite lifespans. Trees do not have a genetically defined programmed lifespan. They die of external causes like disease, destruction, natural disasters, insects, whatever. And as they get older, because they've been subjected to more of this, they are more prone to those external things. But genetically, they are not like wired with a, with an expiration date, sort of the way animals and are, humans, of course, are animals. So the average lifespan of a tree, it's really interesting to see the effects of, human activity on trees, because in an old growth forest, the average lifespan is 1,000 years old, and here's like some of those big old redwood trees. And that's what it was like when the, Europeans came over here. There were trees all around, throughout the United States were that old. But of course, trees, the forests have been logged multiple times. So your average second growth forest tree lifespan is about 200 years, because of human development, logging, and, human induced other causes. In suburban trees, it's only 32 years. Again, a lot of that is because of development. The first thing they do when they go in is they bulldoze down the trees, at least they used to. And in urban areas, just because of all this stress and construction and pollution, and, a lot of times they aren't planted properly, they don't get enough moisture in those little tree wells, their average lifespan is only 7 years. Most trees remain fertile throughout their lifetime. So if they put all that energy into that giant thing, it doesn't make sense, for them to, not to stay fertile, because that's just, co-opting a huge amount of space for that species. So the leading cause of trees for a mature tree these days is no longer those natural causes, but it's human disturbance, climate stress, and, pests and diseases, invasive pests that humans have introduced from other parts. So, it is really amazing, that, but Mother Nature knows a lot of the trees are going to die all along the way, just like with insects laying, hundreds of eggs and only 1 or 2 reach adulthood. Only 1 out of every 10,000 acorns makes it to maturity, which is kind of incredible. I recently had a lesson in this when like a spruce tree died, and all of a sudden hundreds of sugar maple saplings just shot up, and they were so close together. And actually, I'm sure all of us have stories like that, where you just get hundreds of little seedlings of some species or other, like in a flower bed or around, but they get eaten by, the rodents, then they get bigger and the deer browse them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then insects, then they get bigger and bigger, and other things, natural disasters, all this stuff. So only, very small percentage make it to actual maturity. When we talk about, the longevity, like if you go through that appendix, some of them will be referred to as long-lived, some of them as short-lived. If they don't say either, it means it's somewhere like between, sort of average up to like 200 years. But long-lived species are generally considered to live more than 200 years, and short-lived are like perceived as living like 50 years or less. So that's it for tree longevity. Now we'll talk a bit about the trees' roles in the ecosystem. Plants, as we mentioned earlier, only plants can photosynthesize and convert the energy of the sun. Terrestrial, there's like sulfur-based organisms in the deep seas that can convert sulfur to energy. But, land-based, all the energy that gets to pass on to organisms get passed through, through the sun and through plants, which is really kind of incredible. And then they are also the huge recyclers of nutrients. So they create the energy, the sugars, and the through the photosynthesis from carbon dioxide and oxygen. From carbon and water, and then they release oxygen as a byproduct. But they also are huge cyclers of nutrients. So even though they don't produce them, they are taking the nutrients that are broken down by the decomposers and cycling them back up to the food chain. So it's this huge engine going on. And because of trees, they're huge mass and volume per square foot, even if it has underplantings, the bulk of the mass of the vegetation is from the tree. So that means that they play an outsized role in all of this, just because of their mass and their longevity. And of course, as being a native plant group, this, but we never know who's going to watch it. They may not know it, that, native plants, that evolved with other organisms, co-evolved in the same ecoregion support each other better. So that's why native plants are better, including native trees, is because they've evolved for tens of thousands of years, if not longer, sometimes shorter, of course, but they've evolved over the years with these organisms to maximize all of those interchanges. So that is a very simplified version of why native plants are sort of like better than non-native plants in supporting the ecosystem and biodiversity, and also the outsized role of trees in the whole food nutrient cycle. So trees, when we talk about, trees in the ecosystem, it's important to see how they fit into the plant communities and what kind of plant communities actually are in Pennsylvania. In Penn's Woods, it's called Penn's Woods for a reason. Trees define most of the natural plant communities and the associated habitat. So they create the structure for all the other interactions. They are the dominant plant. There's the old saw that, when the Europeans first came, they said that a squirrel could, go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi without ever having to leave a tree. In reality, American Indians also had altered the land. And of course, there are things like wetlands in the lake. So it may have been a circuitous route, but, the point is it was like very heavily forested. And so most of the shrublands and herbaceous plant communities are really early successional habitats or wetlands, like, wet areas, where trees cannot grow because they can't anchor their roots, or they just haven't adapted to the low oxygen levels. But most of the openings, so when you think of how artificial our landscapes are, because so much, not only lawns, but even a lot of people like the prairie look or the meadow look, that wasn't really a look in Pennsylvania. Those were temporary openings from natural disasters for the most part, or like barrens where there's super shallow soil that wouldn't support trees. So most of those are, those herbaceous communities and shrublands are early successional stages on the way up to a climax forest. So that's another thing why trees are so important in Pennsylvania. And for those of us who are interested in native plant gardening and restoring natural ecosystems. So I alluded earlier how trees create the living structure for, I think I'm almost like the stage, for a play that all other life performs within this space created by by plants. And in Pennsylvania, it's, mostly the trees. So this multi-layered, diverse plant community that just provides a habitat for just so many extraordinarily different organisms, animals, plants, fungi, algae, other organisms. It's really like incredible. And so the layers of a deciduous forest are the canopy, the highest layer. That's where the sun is directly hitting, most of the foliage at the top. An understory tree layer of shorter trees that are like a little bit like they're more shade tolerant. And sometimes this understory is like the seedlings, and also any of the lower stories actually. The seedlings are the young trees of the canopy trees that are just sort of like waiting for their spot in the sun, so to speak. When this big tree is going to die or get knocked over, then they're ready to shoot up. And then there's the shrub or seedling layer, that much lower layer, and then the ground layer, which is the generally herbaceous or like crawling woody plants, and then the actual forest floor itself with the duff and like fungi and stuff. So the trees then dramatically affect everything because they're the dominant influence on light, the ambient humidity that they create, how they control the soil moisture, how much they're pulling out of the soil, the nutrients available to all the other organisms. It's the trees that define the habitat for all those other organisms. And so a layered forest like this with all the one thing, it's the maximum amount of vegetation per square foot is by having all these layers packed in with each other. That provides the greatest biological diversity and ecosystem services of all the Pennsylvania plant communities. So hint, hint, I'm going to talk a lot about underplantings and stuff. I think it's very important to, no tree should ever be alone. So how trees specifically support wildlife. all natives, plants, all native species are created equal. Like, you know, one thing that kind of bugs me is like all these top 10 lists. Like everyone thinks like, oh, they should only plant oaks because oaks support the most caterpillars. Well, that's like one species. These other trees, they all evolved together. They all have unique roles and they all have unique relationships with other important organisms. No one organism is more valuable in Mother Nature's eyes than any other one. And so, and they all survive this long because they provide services to other organisms and to the environment. So all of them are important, and especially like, you know, there will, you know, when you go through that appendix of the other trees, you'll see that there are some that just like how monarchs need milkweed, there are like, you know, for instance, the hackberry emperor and the other emperor, I can't remember off the top of my head its name, that both are emperor butterflies rely on hackberry species the same way that monarchs rely on you know, on milkweed. So there are some unique relationships. So if we didn't have any hackberries, we wouldn't have any more of the emperor butterflies. Same way if we didn't have milkweed, we wouldn't have any monarchs. So, and the other thing is like, you know, a lot of times we just focus so much on berries, you know, for the birds, or, you know, seeds for the birds, or, you know, leaves for the caterpillars. Every single part of the tree, like every other plant, is consumed by at least one other kind of wildlife. You know, inside leaves, there are tiny insects boring inside the leaves, not to mention on top of the leaves and under, you know, and underneath the leaves. Inside the trunks, there are insects boring into the trunks, in the roots. You know, just every single part of the tree, both living and dead, feeds more than one species. So the entire thing, every species is necessary, and every part of the plant is helpful to some other organism. So these are the components for like wildlife gardening: food, water, shelter, and places to raise young or give birth. Like if you look at National Wildlife Federation or something like that. So that's why, you know, we're classifying this way. So trees also provide water directly through sap, you know, especially to, you know, insects that feed on trees. You know, and a lot of browsing animals get some of their moisture from trees, especially in drier climates. Bark also catches the precipitation, so the leaves. So sometimes you'll see, you know, animals drinking directly from the leaves, you know, or from the bark, or bathing on it. Like hummingbirds come and bathe on the leaves of my plants when I turn the sprinkler on. So, and then the roots filter the groundwater, which makes it purer for all the, you know, all the species. So trees also provide shelter from the elements and predators, and a place to give birth, lay eggs. Birds aren't the only things that lay eggs. Insects lay eggs, reptiles lay eggs, you know, a lot of other things lay eggs, and also to raise young. So every part of the tree counts not only for food, but in some other way. A word from our sponsors, being our native bees and wildlife. We often hear, and in fact, you know, we've heard, you know, it's a common misperception that wind pollinated trees do not provide pollen to insects, to pollinators. Wrong. Syracuse Society has proved that wrong. There's scientific studies, people have gotten their PhDs on native bees that have proved that wind pollinated trees are very important sources of, particularly of spring pollen for native bees. A lot of our native bees have their whole life cycle, the timing when they emerge as adults, linked into the availability of pollen from specific species. And a lot of them, here's like a bumblebee getting pollen from a bur oak. And I've seen it myself, like in my sugar maples and on my oak trees, tiny insects up there getting the pollen. So I just wanted to put that plug in because I kind of didn't know where else to fit it. But since we're talking about trees, we got to mention that. So trees aren't just for tree huggers, you know, because a lot of times you'll have skeptics like, oh, you know, trees are good for the animals, but what about me? You know, what do they do for humans? I don't need trees. Well, yes, you do. You know, they're the primary generators of oxygen that, you know, you kind of need to breathe. They also filter a lot of the pollutants out of the air. They're very helpful for that. Some, you know, trees are very good at, you know, filtering out specific pollutants. and are planted in urban areas just for that. They enable a lot of noise reduction, the thick foliage and the physical structure of the woody materials. They help sequester carbon. This is all a vast storehouse of carbon, and the trunks in the roots. And then as it decays and falls down, that also puts carbon into the soil. So it's a huge their huge role in carbon sequestration. They help regulate the temperature, not only in the microclimate, but also in a larger area, especially like, you think of something as practical, it's like shade on, on an individual structure, but also they help regulate the, the structure globally. They help with erosion control by holding the soil together with their roots. They help improve the soil by like housing all those microorganisms and other organisms, and they filter the water like we alluded to before. So they aren't just for people who are nature lovers, tree huggers. Everybody needs trees. So that being said, how do we pick the right ones for your home landscape? Well, I always like to put everything in context. So we look what's native. We talked about the importance of native trees. Well, what is native to Pennsylvania? What's native to our area, Southeast Pennsylvania? Well, during the Ice Age, this is basically where the glaciers covered Pennsylvania. So in this area, which includes most of Southeast Pennsylvania, was tundra and boreal forests, because it was very cold, even though it wasn't covered by glaciers, it was still super cold. Then as the climate warmed, southern species moved up, slowly, moved up over thousands of years, and they formed a rich, diverse forest that covered like 90 or 95% of the land, which, when, that includes, like land area includes like water bodies. So it's really, probably 95% of the terrestrial, land as opposed to, covered by water bodies. There's another misconception a lot of times is that American Indians did not affect the forest. They did. They burned a lot of the forest because it helped with their own housing, agricultural, and hunting. It's easier to shoot something if you can see it, if you don't have to go around the underbrush. So that automatically had some impact on the trees. That favored fire-resistant species like oaks, hickories, and pines. So when early Europeans came, those were like, some of the predominant species, but they also focused on these gorgeous, gigantic trees. They wanted, they needed them for things like shipbuildings. So they targeted the white pines with tall straight trunks, the hemlocks for tanning. Tanning leather was huge business. They used to just like cut down hemlocks, strip the bark and leave the tree to die, and use the bark for, for tanning. Those beautiful, gigantic hemlocks. And oaks and chestnuts were just killed for charcoal to use in industrial furnaces and stuff. So a huge another logging era was like the railroad logging, because not only to clear for the railroads, but also enabled heavier equipment to come in. So that the railroad logging area in 1890 to 1930 resulted in vast clear cuts and burning just to open land up for agriculture and stuff. So overall of the—
You need to pull this down.
Somebody should probably put their microphone on mute unless you're trying to talk to the rest of us. So overall, the forest cover was reduced to 30%. So from 95%, 95% to, like 1/3 down to 32% because of, the European, drive logging. So today in Southeast Pennsylvania uplands, we are predominantly red oak mixed hardwood subtype of the eastern hardwood forest. And so that's like this area here is the Appalachian oak forest. And within that, our subtype is this red oak mixed hardwood subtype, dominated by red and white oak, chestnut, tulip trees. This is what it was when Europeans came and stuff, red maple and hickories. And so, but now, of course, we know diseases and everything have wiped out a lot of that stuff. And so floodplains statewide, so not this Southeast Pennsylvania, but statewide, a lot of the floodplains of Pennsylvania are dominated by sycamore, silver maple, and these other floodplain species. Human-induced pests and diseases and acid rain have impacted a lot. So like there are hardly any elms left. Chestnuts are virtually gone. Hemlocks are pretty much gone too. Oaks have been severely impacted. Beech have been impacted. Dogwood, sugar maples, ash trees, they've all been impacted by these human induced pests and diseases, like brought in where our native trees don't have natural resistance. So if you want an idea of the an idea of the plant communities that grow in your particular county, your particular area, you visit the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program site that's linked on my webpage, and that'll give you a detailed plant community description as well as county inventories. So you can really drill down and see what kind of communities, what kind of trees grew in your area, and what kind of shrubs and perennial herbaceous plants are associated with them. So today, second growth forest, but that's any place where trees dominate like the aerial extent. So it could even be a lawn with a big tree in it. So like a lot of suburban areas are considered forest, even though they're not like a real true forest. But second growth forest covers about 60% of the state. There are 135 species native trees. This is as of 2005, the book, The Trees of Pennsylvania by Rhodes and Block, which is, I have the citation later. And there were 64 species of naturalized non-native trees that were at that time also. There are probably more of the non-natives and fewer of the natives, unfortunately. So as far as selecting native trees, you want to look to make sure that the tree is native to your part of your ecoregion, because we can see ecoregions are pretty huge, but you want to see if one's native to your part. And the way to do that is through this county lookup of some of the sites that I have the later, like Bonab and the Lady Bird Johnson Center. They allow you to look for species by county, and there's zip code finders from Audubon National Wildlife Federation. So not only should it be part of your county, but it should prefer your site conditions, your unamended site conditions. Doesn't just tolerate them, because some of them will tolerate a wide range, but it actually prefers those conditions. That's where it's going to do its best. The way to find that out is to look at what its natural habitat is. So when in my, my appendix with all the tree things, I show you what the natural habitats are. So you can kind of figure out if that sounds right for, what would be on your property or what you're trying to create on your property. And you want to make sure it's suited for your goals without a lot of maintenance. So you don't want to have to be amending the soil all the time. Don't want to be pruning something, planted the right size. You don't want some big tree and then you got to cut it down because you put it too close to your house. And then what are your goals? So within that set of trees that are native to your part of your ecosystem, which you can find by looking at the county, so then what are your goals? Are you trying to get a canopy tree, like a really tall tree, or maybe an understory tree or a shorter tree that's not an actual understory tree? So a canopy tree is usually like, a taller tree that the crown prefers full sun, so it's striving for that sun, usually more than 30 feet tall with a long bole, that part without lower branches. And an understory tree is shorter because it's usually growing under one of these. And the crown prefers part to full shade generally. So everyone likes their place in the sun, so if, they'll always grow to a little bit more sunlight, but usually they do best in these areas with part to full shade. And in that list, identify trees that are designated as understory trees. Some tree species can be both, like sugar maples can grow both as understories or as canopy trees, and some are neither, like particularly early successional trees, like like some of the cherries. That there's some of those short-lived trees aren't designed to live long because the taller trees were going to come in and shade them out someday. So a lot of the early successional trees are short-lived. So are you looking for some particular wildlife or soil benefit? Do you have a personal goal, like you want blossoms, particular fall colors, or are you a forager? Do you want to be able to harvest stuff from them? Other things to look at is, to think about is you generally, to maximize fruit production, and seed production, you want to have 2 or more of each species for the best cross pollination, because even trees that have both male and female flowers, whether they are unisexual flowers like a monoecious species, or whether they are perfect flowers which have both reproductive male and female within the same flower. And so a perfect plant is a plant that has perfect flowers. A monoecious plant is one that has separate male and female flowers. And a dioecious plant is one where it has male flowers on one tree and female flowers on the other tree. So you want to make sure, but even the trees that have perfect flowers are they don't like self-fertilization if they don't have to do it. It's like a last ditch resort. So all of them produce better seeds and fruit when they have cross-pollination with another tree of their own species. Of course, if you do have dioecious, you want one male and one female if you want fruit. Also, it's a good idea to have diverse species, because just to hedge your bet, not only for the diversity, the biodiversity, and of the soil organisms in the wildlife that we saw earlier, but also just to hedge your bets. You never know nobody heard of emerald ash borer like 15 years ago, or spotted lanternfly. And so who knows what, horde disease or pest is like lurking around the corner. So the more species that you have, the chances are that you're going to be able to, survive something like that. Like I had a lot of white ash trees in my woods. They were one of the dominant canopy trees. And as soon as I heard about the emerald ash borer, I started planting other canopy trees, underneath them, but, they couldn't grow fast enough. So all of a sudden, one year the emerald ash borers came, all my, most of my canopy trees, easily 2/3 of my canopy cover just died within a summer. And luckily I had a pretty good understory tree layer. And so that kept providing enough shade for most of the herbaceous things like trilliums and stuff like that to survive. But that was because the prior guy just let first let that area go to woods, just let things come up, and it was all those early successional trees, including those white ash. So the more you have diverse species, the more you can hedge against disasters like that. And also chances are we don't know what climate change is going to exactly bring as far as pests and diseases and everything too. So the more you have, the chances are that it's going to survive climate change. And a good interim strategy for to deal with climate change is to plant trees that are still native to your area, but that tolerate warmer, zones. They tolerate warmer things. So trees that are, extend farther south, their natural range, or, that are at the northern limit now. You don't have to start bringing southern trees up from Florida or Georgia, because our wildlife that's here still needs the trees that they evolved with. So we want to give them their last, good chance to survive climate change themselves. So here are some of those helpful websites, with the, to find the native status, the biota of, BONAP. This is the Lady Bird Johnson one. They have a database where you can search by county and some plant attributes. Really easy things are the Audubon and the National Wildlife Federation, also Chesapeake Bay, because they specify if it applies to Piedmont. A lot of those trees, grow, in our area too, even if we're not in the Chesapeake Bay. Those all have zip code finders, and some of them you can plug in different things like the kind of wildlife you're trying to attract, or even your soil conditions like Chesapeake Bays and stuff like that. And really good book is the the Trees of Pennsylvania, which I have right here, but it's underneath a bunch of stuff by Rhodes and Block, from Morris Arboretum, which is the official arboretum of the state of Pennsylvania. So quickly on planting and maintaining trees. So you want to make sure that you place them properly. So to fit with your design and landscaping goals. A good place to start is the, right plant for the right place, but it's, it's a good place to start, but, sunlight and moisture and temperature, zones are only a few of the things actually affect the tree. So it's good to get an idea of its natural habitat and suitable for the existing site conditions. I said, look to the natural habitat, which I described, and think long-term. It's going to be, in many ways, trees are our best and our biggest investments because they last so long. They're so big. They're also hard to move. So I want to make sure that, once you plant it, that you kind of really, people put more thought into what they're gonna, wear that summer, as opposed to a tree that could last for hundreds of years. So put the thought into selecting your tree and siting it properly. As far as spacing goes, you want to allow for the full tree of the full width of mature trees, especially when you're planting a specimen tree that's not going to be competing with other trees. So you want to account for that full width. when you're planting trees in a woodland thing, which I hope, you know, more and more people do, then you plant them closer together, because a lot of times when you're out in the woods and you see how close they are together. A good rule of thumb, I think, for, you know, for those of us who aren't, you know, actually doing woodlands, because some people who start woodlands plant little seedlings every square foot. And, you know, but that's just impractical for a lot of home gardeners, and they're starting with small seedlings. But most of us are probably buying, you know, 4 to 6 foot high trees, container trees, or ball and burlap, and planting those. So I find that a good rule of thumb is to plant the tall trees, the canopy trees, you know, like 16 to 20 feet apart, interspaced with the understory trees or shrubs. And then in this, the perennial thing, like if you're starting all these from that small size, this is still getting a lot of sun. So, you know, you can just like keep your full sun perennials, or just let it grow, whatever's going to grow there, because it's going to die in a few years once it starts getting shaded out. So you can either plant like perennials that tolerate like sun to part shade. And then once these actually get big enough to cast consistent shade, then you start putting in your shade tolerant herbaceous ones. And as I mentioned earlier, understory is really important. So as the backup for the shade herbaceous plants, if anything happens to the canopy trees. Planting a tree, you know, you want to make sure that you plant it at the proper depth, have the soil ball on the, you know, like resting firmly on the subsoil. The dig only as deep as the, you know, the roots, and dig wide enough for the roots to extend. If you have really long roots, sometimes I just dig a little side trench out, or just even slit the soil with a shovel and stick that little root in there. So it's not going to coil around inside that hole. A bare root tree, you can actually build, you know, depending upon if it doesn't have a taproot, if it's sort of like spread out, you can actually build a little cone of soil and put the bare root on top of it instead of trying to poke in, you know, between. But you want to make sure that you get rid of any air pockets in there, you know, because that can dry out the roots and also invite pests. Then you want to like mulch, you know, the 3-3-3 rule, 3 feet, you know, 3 feet diameter, 3-inch deep, and keep it 3 inches from the trunk or the root flare. Very important to keep that root flare above ground, because above ground root tissues are meant to be above ground. You know, they have like, you know, the below ground parts have particular protections to be in damper environments. So you want to really make sure you keep that, you know, root flare exposed. Staking and protecting a tree. Not all trees need to even be staked. You know, very few trees actually need to be staked. It's just really if they're top heavy or in a strong winds, or they have a weak trunk, 2 stakes outside the root zone with flexible ties on opposite sides. If you have deer, I find 5 feet is optimal. And I snip these little openings to let the branches, make sure they don't rub, because that will abrade the bark and allow in pests. And then a shorter thing of smaller mesh for rabbits and rodents. Mulching, we talked about the proper depth of a mulch. I got to change plant to plant. The best mulch, you know, for woodies, plants, you know, you want your plant material to sort of like match the material that's above, because it's going to degrade. And so the best plant.
Take to the bathroom and hang up your towel.
Okay. The best, you know, mulch for trees is arborist chips, because it's basically the whole tree ground up. If you can't get arborist chips, then, you know, use like, you know, like wood chips, or, you know, or shredded roots, and then just, you know, let them put some leaves in there or something, so you get that sort of herbaceous component, or dry grass clippings. But you kind of want to try to have the whole mix, so that feeds the soil organisms, which in turn feed the tree. Underplanting, you know, I'm a big one from underplanting. So, you know, you may be hearing about soft landings. At a minimum, if you can, you know, mulching's better than nothing, because at least it protects it from weed whackers, and, you know, helps keep moisture in the soil, and protects the trunk and the flare. But soft landings, at least you're planting, you know, at least that as far as the mulch ring, with, you know, native plants, understory plants, and that helps increase the beneficial organisms. And of course, it's always best to actually do a real woodland. And, you know, trees that you know, species that are suitable for that. My site, there's a Who Need Hosta presentation for shade gardening, native plants for shade, or Lucia lilacs, which I think I'm giving to you guys in November. And that is a presentation on shrubs, including, you know, subshrubs. Critical root zone is quickly touch on this because, if you do any construction, you can look at this graphic, to get the exact dimensions. But the reason that I like to include this is that no impact zone for construction, which is like, it's 1/4 of the whole root zone. So it's about 6 times the diameter of the tree at breast height, which is considered 4.5 feet. That's a good size for your soft landing or your root mulch, your mulching, because that protects most of the root flare. And that's where you don't want anybody walking, any kind of activities on that area. They protect it during construction. You should protect it in your home. Pruning, again, only do it when it's necessary. Hopefully you've got the right size tree for your situation. So you're focusing on disease or broken things, broken branches, or branches are crossing and abrading. You want to prune them properly by leaving the collar there of the bark so it can grow over the cut, and use sharp implements. And here's how you cut like a larger thing. You never want to remove more than a third of all the plant material, so a combo of the branches or the roots. And late winter is usually the best time because these plants are dormant. Just a couple of other things. I've talked about the importance of woodland communities. Ideally, I think a good balance. You want most of your, your plantings to sort of be this woodland, late, geared target, early succession. Think of your other areas, even if you're going to maintain them as early succession, think that's what they are. And they should be like smaller areas, just herbaceous and shrub scrub. So but you want the bulk to be these, the true woodland garden if you can. And then, especially gardens like rock gardens, water gardens, smaller subsets of those. Leave the snags, important for all the dead things, for all these animals. Including this morning, this pileated woodpecker came in this morning, I went out to breakfast, came home, it's in my yard and one of the snags. I'm like, okay, he really wants me to point out the importance of leaving snags because he hung around for like a long time and was very, visible. So there's also important as a way of, sometimes logs form nursery logs where certain tree species actually need to germinate in decaying logs. In summary, all native organisms are created equal. So every, native tree has a place and is as valuable as any other tree. So try to plant the species. Mother Nature had it all figured out. We don't need to figure it out. You plant the species that are native to your area of your ecosystem, and it will support wildlife in some ways. They do best in these naturalistic communities, and you want to plant them for the long term. So I will just quickly show you the standard, what this is going to look like. If you go into the database, it's organized by genus. So here, for instance, is maples. So this first page talks about the genus. If there's only one species in that particular genus, there's only one slag. So, it talks about some of the wildlife value, the flowers, so whether they're monoecious or dioecious and how they're pollinated. And then any particular attributes are important, like the cross genus wise. Then on the next page, there's the lists that are recommended for our area. I started with that Audubon list, and then I added to it and subtracted from it based upon my own experience and what I see at nurseries. A lot of times I even went to different nursery sites if they had a tree, and I looked at all the major nurseries in this area. And if I couldn't find it, I took off. It's okay, that may be a cool tree, but who's ever going to be able to find it? And then I tried to have something about each species to help you distinguish between them, not only that general description, including where they grow naturally, but then also something that will help you understand the differences between the species. And you can see here where I identify, canopy or understory. It can be both. And if it's just an understory, if it doesn't say anything, then it's a canopy tree. And then we'll go and take questions. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I live in the woods and I just lost 400-year-old oak trees. And I had planted the understory around everything.
Mm-hmm.
And everything got totally broken off when I had to have them taken down.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, how do you deal with that? Because you said you underplanted all those ash trees, Didn't they
Yeah.
fall down on the other trees and damage them?
Not all of them have fallen down yet. They're slowly doing that, but yes, I do notice that they are slowly falling down and damaging some of them. The ash trees, I only had one ash tree that was in a like what I consider like the yard area where people really kind of go, and that's away from the house. So I'm kind of actually, and I'm the only one who lives there, so I'm just kind of letting them fall and hoping that they don't fall on me. Because I'll be able to remove that thing. The other ones in the woods, I'm actually kind of seeing what happens, because I kind of believe in letting nature take its course, because I learned when they died, and then those understory trees, some of which were damaged when some of the ashes have fallen down, but mine only died like a couple of years ago. So, the most damage is yet to come. But I noticed I started getting different kinds of warblers, like I had like woodland warblers. So my point is that like nature is designed for that. It's designed for natural disasters, for hurricanes, for stuff like that. So there are species that rely on that. And then other herbaceous species just started popping up that I didn't have before. So there was a seed bank in the soil, or they were able to germinate the seeds that came in. It can be sort of like sad, to think of these trees dying and stuff. But then when you start thinking, it's kind of exciting, especially when I started seeing different kinds of warblers that I hadn't seen before. Like, I just realized, wow, this is just really part of like the cycle, but if that is depressing, the best way to get fast shade is through shrubs, and so in some areas, or I'm letting the pokeweed grow, because pokeweed just like covers and shades a lot of those little herbaceous. And I know that a lot of those things, they may not do so well now, but once the pokeweed gets shaded out or whatever and dies back, some of the seed bank's going to be there from those other herbaceous plants or their roots or whatever. So they're going to be able to come back. So it is part of the natural cycle. It's hard to witness because we get attached to these beautiful old trees, but that's kind of how I deal with it, is just by accepting and then trying to just, like I said, plant fast growing things where I need to, like, shrubs, let tall herbaceous things grow that will shade and protect those lower things. Did that answer your question?
Well, you just told me that you haven't really seen the worst of it yet. So, I mean,
No, I think I've seen, I think like a lot of my understory trees will come back because they're kind of like, they're really fast. In some areas I have seen the worst, but you're right, hasn't like the entire thing. But I think that principle applies, that it's giving a chance for some of those other things to come up. Because like, for instance, my understory trees, a lot of them sucker. And so they just shoot up like very quickly, or they lean over and stuff. So, so I do think it's going to, apply, but yeah, that's kind of the best answer that I have.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Hi, Mark, this is Susan.
Hi.
Hi, I was interested in your slide on staking. And I'd like to hear your opinion on those tree tubes. And the reason I'm asking is that a couple of years ago, I was able to get quite a few saplings, I mean, really little trees, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall and very young. And I put a bunch of them in a semi wet area where I don't go all the time. And I knew they needed deer protection. So I got a bunch of tree tubes and staked the tubes and put the trees in them. And I've had really mixed results with that. And I'm just interested to, now that I've gone through some experience, interested to hear your take on whether I should have used tree tubes at all, whether they have applications sometimes. What are your thoughts on those?
I'm generally not a fan of tree tubes. I do know people who use them, and I think they are, the most advantageous and exactly sort of what you were talking about, places where you don't go that often. Like, if like for an ecological restoration project, they're planting trees where that they cannot monitor regularly. But part of the reason I'm not like a huge fan is, for one thing, you can't see what's happening. So if you're there, it's like hard to monitor the tree, anything that could be happening to the trunk. But also trees need these lower branches. These lower branches, the tube does provide them some protection, but the reason that we're saying is not to prune them off is that they do shade the lower part of the tree. They do provide nutrients and everything. So a lot of times with tree tubes, for if a taller tree, like if you say you have little seedlings, so they don't have side branches yet, they do grow faster. It has been shown that trees in tubes do grow faster, which is one reason they like to use them in ecological restoration projects. And, where people are going less often to check, they only maybe monitor it like once every month or, twice a year once it's, a little bit more established or something. But like, with a homeowner, most of us ideally are monitoring our trees more often than that. So for that reason, I think when you can, it's better not to have tree tubes, but they do have their advantages. The trees do grow taller, faster, that they may not be as full at the bottom, but I prefer, to be as natural as possible, to let the tree have its natural form with these lower branches as long as possible. One thing I think it's cool when you see a mature tree with like a low branch that's almost at ground level. I think that looks like pretty neat. So, but I'm pretty much like a Mother Nature knows best. So try to keep everything as close to natural as possible. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's very useful. What I noticed last year was when I put a lot of tubes in, and as you know, we had 60 odd inches of rain instead of 44.
Yeah.
So in a really wet year, I actually think that the tubes kept the humidity in, and I lost some trees to, I think, mold and whitefly.
Yeah.
This year, when we've had half the rain we're supposed to, I kind of wish I had the tubes, because again, I'm noticing that I think they keep the humidity in and maybe kept some of my little seedlings alive that otherwise would have browned out. So but you can't predict, in the spring,
Right,
you're going to have a dry year or a wet year. So it's totally random. But I see what you're saying, that in a site where you're not monitoring a whole lot, tubes are they're definitely better than nothing.
Yeah. Especially like a lot of those times people don't provide any tree protection. See, like, I'm providing, the protection from the deer and stuff that a tree tube would, by using these things. So I do have a lot of wire cages around my trees, the smaller trees, but the tree tubes, you don't need that because it's providing that protection. But you also did raise that good point about the humidity. Some tree tubes are perforated. And so I guess, they're designed to sort of help with a more natural exchange of gases and stuff. My other concern with tree tubes is if they're not being monitored, is that then, rodents can use them to nest in, particularly at the bottom, or pests can use them for cover, but that's, probably pretty minor in the context of a big ecological restoration project.
Well, the tubes did have those bird nets on the tops, which I thought was really valuable, because you would never want a bird to zip down there and not be able to get out.
That's a really good point. Yes. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Those are important.
Yeah.
And of course, you jam the tube down in the ground with your hand when you're planting. So I haven't had any rodent incursion in the bottom.
Good.
I'm just going to be a little more careful about where I use them and where I don't. One place I do use them, which is interesting, is I've got buckrub problems in my woodlands. And so this time of year, I will go around with tree tubes and actually slit them vertically with a knife and just wrap them around a trunk that doesn't have a lot of low side branches. Because otherwise the bucks are going to strip, especially cedars, the bucks are going to strip the bark right off those things, cedars and cherries. So I do find them useful for that purpose in more mature trees.
Yeah. No, that's true. Like what I do if I don't have wire cages around them is I just keep like green vinyl fencing, that's like maybe like 3/4 inch mesh, but it's like heavy duty. And I just roll that around the trunk or the lower branches. Like if it's in a lawn area or something like that, where I don't want that caged look for the trees, then I just do that temporarily. But yeah, that's a good idea, is to, use any means to protect them just during the winter from the antler rub, which is coming upon us soon.
Right. The hardware cloth does look a lot better. I've got some sassafras that are just permanently wrapped, because if they weren't, the bark would just be stripped.
Yeah. Certain trees are definitely deer favorites.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. It's hard to raise them.
Yeah, those magnolias too. Yeah.
I haven't had the problem with magnolias. Which ones?
I've had problems with the sweet bay and the tripetala. Is that umbrella tree? I think that one's the umbrella tree. So yeah, no, I mean, bucks will try to crash through the fences to rub their antlers on sweet bays, but it could also, part of it probably has to do with location, because there's prime location at the edge of like, sort of a meadow area. So a lot of it is not only the species, but also the the location, because as you probably know, bucks, one of the reasons that they rubs not only because of location and the roughness of the bark to get the velvet off, but then later they're also going for the coloration and the scent of the sap. So that's one reason they prefer specific species.
The coloration and the scent of the sap is important to them?
That's what I've had some, like deer people tell me. I haven't,
Oh.
researched the papers myself, but I've seen it on like, like some, when I've read articles about, I'm so hesitant to say anything unless I'm familiar with the research after I read like the garden professor's blog. But it's just like, so according to the secondary sources that I have read, yes, but I have not done primary research on it.
Well, that could explain why the cherries and the cedars in my woods are particularly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Also, they have softer bark.
Yeah, that's true too.
Which could be part of it. Yeah, the
Yeah,
deer are just overall a challenge.
Yeah.
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 Well, thank you for that. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
you're welcome. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Mark, I have a question.
Sure.
We have a house in the borough of Phoenixville, and we have 2 pin oaks there.
Mhm.
And of course, they were planted when the development was put in the early 1960s.
Mhm.
And I had a tree company come out and trim them back. My mother had never had them trimmed. We've asked to see if we could get them cut down because they've lifted up the sidewalk.
Oh.
And the other one is near the water main.
Mhm.
Is there anything other than just trimming them back? I'm concerned that the roots eventually are going to get into our sewer drain. Or is there anything that we can do? The borough's going through an inventory, and they're taking some trees out, but they're very reluctant. In fact, if you cut the tree down without their permission, you'll then pay a fine, and then on top of it, pay for what they consider the worth of that tree. So it
Wow.
could cost over $6,000 if you do that. So are any tips you could give us? I mean, the sidewalk we're going to have to replace, but I don't know how I would replace it because it's lifted. If I pour a new sidewalk, it's going to lift up. We're not going to be able to pour it smooth.
Right. Yeah. And you might, and then you'd probably compromise too many of the tree roots. I don't know how close the tree is. Yeah, but we can go back to that construction slide that addresses this exact thing. I actually used to do this as part of consulting work, was do construction assessments on.
Right. Yeah, it's too late now, but
Yeah.
okay, I'll just work with the
see
borough.
that.
I just wasn't sure if there's anything. I'm just concerned because if somebody trips, I'm responsible, but yet the borough won't let us cut it down.
Yeah, that's what's weird, but it sounds like you really have to coordinate with the borough. But generally, there's no way that you can cut like a lot of the roots, like a third of the roots, without damaging the tree. And a lot of times, even cutting a third of the roots is gonna, damage it if it's too close, if it's within those critical root zones, particularly within the closest, 25 to 50% of the root zone. So it may be that those trees are doomed. I don't know about how close the other one is to the water main and all that stuff, and it'd be possible to prune the roots, but then how would you keep them from growing back and stuff too without putting some kind of barrier? And it just sounds like your borough is so involved that you better coordinate with them.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I just thought but that's good to know about if they would say to cut the roots back, it's really going to end up damaging the tree anyway. But thank you very much. This has been a great presentation, and I apologize to everybody. I hope I wasn't yelling or cursing when my mic was unmuted.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
We didn't hear any cursing. It would have made it more interesting.
Thank
Really
you.
good question about the pruning the roots, but I have seen in my daughter's village, tree roots next to the sidewalk actually whacked off vertically. And the tree, it's like a huge old maple, is still doing fine.
Yeah,
now, maples are different than oaks. So It might be different, but the other alternative I've seen people do sometimes is they will swing the sidewalk in around the tree root, and
Yeah.
this, they're voluntarily doing this on their property, of course, but it's an
Yeah.
alternative to cutting down a tree that's going to cost you $6,000 in a fine.
Right. Yeah. If the borough will let you do that. Yeah, no, it is crazy how you see some trees that seemingly had so much of their roots lopped off, and you wonder how they're doing it, but it is possible that the roots that were that close to the impervious surface weren't that important anyway. Like, it was getting most of its nutrients from the part of the roots that were farther away in the open areas. So this 30% of roots wasn't as important because these had already compensated, but also things want to survive. Nature wants to survive. Organisms want to survive. So they're going to find a way if they can. But yeah, it is crazy. Like, I used to be, part of my work was consulting for PennDOT projects, and it was just like insane which trees would survive and which ones wouldn't.
So that's interesting. Because we prune the tops of trees in the winter when the sap is down, and we think that that's better for the tree because it'll put new growth up when the sap rises. If you prune the roots, should you prune the roots in the late spring to summer when most of the tree's activity is above ground and there isn't a ton of food in the roots? Does that make a difference?
I'm not sure, but just speculating, I would still want to do it during the winter, because even though if more of the energy is there, the above ground still is not relying on it. I mean, that would be like my gut instinct would be to still do it sometime in midwinter, because then it will just compensate. Then the roots will kind of have a chance to heal a little bit before the spring rush. And then the top will just grow accordingly to the amount of energy that's left. But, usually roots are storing extra energy. They don't just deplete all their energy for that spring, effusion. And then the trees, the leaves, as soon as they leaf out, they're starting to generate new stuff. So there's usually a backup, system in there. But my gut instinct is to just, prune in late winter the same as you do for above ground. But again, I haven't researched that, so it's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and maybe ask the borough if a couple of the upper limbs can be pruned at the same time so that the roots don't have to support as much as they did before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. I am so sorry that I missed the very beginning, Mark, of your presentation.
Oh, hi, Jesse. Yeah.
Hi. I'm so excited to be able to review the recording so I can see the beginning. But I caught the end and it was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for asking some great questions. If you have any other questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, I'm going to, Mark, have you stop sharing, and we have a few other things from the chapter to share.
Okay, and then just really quick, since you just got on, is that I pointed out that I have like an appendix with all the different species arranged by genus, et cetera, et cetera. They did not go through, because of like time and everything, and it's just important to focus on that, and people can go through it themselves. If at some future date you just want a presentation just going through the appendix with all the different genus and the different tree types and species, we could do that if it fits your needs. But I just wanted you to be aware that that is a possibility.
That would be
Mark,
awesome.
I want you to know, forevermore, everything you have to offer us, we will always take, because you are a pleasure and we want all of your knowledge. So we'll definitely schedule to go over that. No pressure, but yeah, we'll take
Okay.
time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful, and I love talking to you guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I am going to try and pull up my screen here. I am not sure if we got to see this. Hold on one sec. I don't think I did that right. Justin. Okay, let me see. Share screen. This is what I want to do. Gotta find the right one, guys. Sorry. My banner's in the way. That's the problem here. Okay. area. Susan and Audrey, could you tell me, did we start the presentation with the slides or no?
No, Jesse, Marc was awesome and on the ball, and we started like at 7:02 with Marc's presentation. So thank you, Marc. It was fantastic.
At 7:02, I was literally tying someone up. So I'm so sorry. So we're just going to very briefly, for anybody who did stay on after Marc's presentation, this is us and this is how you get a hold of us. These are all of the ways that you can visit us, contact us, get our information. This is Marc. This is, I know I've shared this before, but this is all the terrible things that you can do to kill a tree. It's on a Penn State Extension Master Gardener's website somewhere, I believe, but it was kind of a joke follow-up to all the great advice that Marc gave us. Our chapter business, our financial report, we are well off financially as a chapter. We gave a donation to Wild Seed Project. We paid an exhibitor fee for the Green Earth Festival in Phoenixville that's happening. You'll be hearing a little bit more about that. We did receive our dues reimbursement. So we have some money that we want to spend on future projects. Over the Labor Day weekend, I was very fortunate. My family and I were able to table an event at the Ludwig's Corner Horse Show and Country Fair. And we talked to lots of homeowners, many of which have horses, so they have acreage that they can make a difference on. And we talked to them about how they could reduce their turf grass lawn, plant native plants, and grow butterflies. So that was a great weekend. Hopefully, maybe some of those people who put down their email are on this meeting tonight. I want to have Audrey talk about the thought of the month. She's done some really great brainstorming about things that we should talk about this month, and we've decided possibilities beyond our properties would be really wonderful for her to share.
Okay, so this month we are thinking about what is possible in our neighborhoods and communities. In a neighborhood in the Virginia mountains, a group of dedicated volunteers is doing amazing work with the native plants that grow on the mountain. The group has planted and maintains 3 large native gardens in the community. They also collect seeds for propagating. 5 times per year, they hold a native plant sale, selling what they grow from seed and cuttings. The quality, quantity, and selection is truly impressive. In the near future, one of the organizers will be the feature presenter for a Wild Ones of SEPA meeting, so look for details to follow. It is our hope that we can look to this group as a model for what is possible in our own neighborhoods and communities. So for example, those of you that are maybe dealing with HOAs, we're hoping to provide some thoughts about maybe, a template that we can follow for how to get our neighborhoods to look kind of like this. I mean, this is in Wintergreen, Virginia, in the mountains. And you can see on the bottom right here, this is one of the gardens that they maintain. It is just stunning. I mean, Susan, I know, what was it, like 20 different natives, the list that I sent you today. It's just, it's too much to go into tonight. And like I said, we'll be doing this in the near future. So please look for that, because what they're doing here is just incredible, just incredible.
And what we want to stress is that, yes, we can all impact our own properties, but when we can move beyond that to properties that we don't reside in, but many people get to see, not only does it impact that environment, but it impacts every person that comes there and witnesses that and is inspired to then go home to their property and see what they can do there. So it's a wonderful thing. I'm really excited. I think we should all schedule a chapter tour to Audrey's.
Yes, please do. There's some more pictures on the next slide too of the neighborhood and some plants that grow here.
Pictures. And it leads us very nicely into our tree of the month.
Jesse, were you showing, I'm sorry, because I'm looking at, yeah, my presentation from earlier. That's why I didn't see it. Okay. Okay. So Sassafras is our tree of this month. And a deciduous understory tree, Sassafras has one of the coolest plant names around. And it has one of the coolest leaves around because it actually has 3 different shapes of leaves on one tree: the mitten, the ghost, and the oval. This is referred to as having polymorphic leaves. It's an early succession tree, one of the first to move into disturbed soil. It's a fast grower and can spread by suckering. Sassafras likes well-drained and acidic soil. It will grow in part shade, part sun, or sun. It's in the same family as laurel and spicebush. You can often find it growing at the edge of woodlands, along with sugar maple, flowering dogwood, eastern red cedar, and beech. The average height of sassafras is 30 to 50 feet tall, with a spread of 25 to 40 feet. Fall foliage is spectacular: orange, yellow, scarlet, and purple. The leaves, twigs, and spring blossoms are highly aromatic, smelling like citrus, cinnamon, or root beer when crushed. In fact, sassafras used to be the main ingredient in making root beer, but is no longer used. Yellowish green flowers grow on the ends of branches in the spring in clusters, changing to bluish black berries on female trees in late summer. Sassafras berries are eaten by black bears, wild turkeys, and songbirds. Deer eat the leaves and twigs. Rabbits nibble at the bark. Spicebush, swallowtail, and promethea moth use sassafras as a host plant, as do about 36 other species of butterflies and moths. Sassafras are said to be good luck, and I think you're pretty lucky if you have these beautiful trees growing near you.
I can't agree more.
Master, you know about transplanting.
We're getting a question if anyone knows about transplanting sassafras. The little bit that I know is that most, if you're going right from your tree, are suckers that are attached by the root, and they don't transplant very well. That's been my experience and what I know. If anyone else can add more information, please open your mic and let us know.
Good question for Marc.
Audrey, as you.
No,
pointed out-
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had the same experience as Jesse, that most of them are like suckers. And so they're kind of hard to transplant, in the mature trees, because they've spread out so much with the other, suckering trees coming up from them are difficult to transplant for that reason. Because I've even ones that I think like, the suckers that seem to have a good root system seem to develop on their own. When I try to transplant them, it just doesn't seem to take. So I don't know if there's like a secret to it, but I haven't found it.
Question. Thank you for asking. Next, we have our upcoming opportunities. I wanted to share, I was hoping that Sam would be on tonight. Sam, are you on? And I'm just not recognizing your name. I don't think so. Well, she had emailed me with a really exciting opportunity. She has found a source for some Quercus prinoides acorns by the pound at a reasonable price, and hopes to grow them out, and she's going to use them in a restoration plan that she has for, I think, a neighborhood park in her area. But she was offering to see if any of our members were interested in partaking in either ordering some of the acorns, or if they might be interested in potentially, I think, purchasing trees once she germinates the acorns and has some seedlings in the spring. She could speak to this better than I could, but there's a rough idea in the works that this sought after small oak tree that starts bearing acorns within like 5 years and stays low, almost shrub-like, would be available to us potentially. So keep that in the back of your mind if it's something that you're interested in. I know I have been looking for this species, and I thought that Go Native Trees would have it, and it had been on their list for a little while, but when I looked into it, they didn't have any. So it's much sought after, hard to find, and she found a source. So hopefully we'll get more about that when she is able to join us. Also, the Philadelphia Honey Fest starts tomorrow. I will be spending my afternoon in Philly at Glenford on the Delaware, 5 to 9, and I will be telling everybody who stops by about the importance of native plants. I find that this is a really great opportunity to talk to people who don't know they want to hear about native plants and then are very fascinated. And it's a very diverse group of people, some of whom have a small urban yard that they have the ability to plant in, some of them that actually have access to acreage and volunteer for different organizations with their parks so that they can influence what is planted on larger scales of property. And some people who have nothing, they don't even have a pot on a balcony, but they are fascinated to learn about native plants and tell me all the time they look forward to a time in their life where they will have a pot on a balcony or a yard that they can influence. So we're planting those seeds at these kind of events. So if you are interested and would like to join me, just email me. I will be at all 3 of these events, but I'd be more than happy to have your company to help me spread the word about this. At Wick House, it's historic Wick House, and there are other vendors and people there. So Bartram's Garden is my favorite location because they have a lot of native plants there and they sell native plants. So it's exciting to be in that location too. So if you're interested, just email me and I'll get you details and we'll get you there. There is a native plant sale at one of my favorites at Hawk Mountain that's happening on September 17th. So all spring long, I looked for this sale to happen and I wasn't finding information and then just through the good fortune of my husband reaching out to someone on Nextdoor, I got to meet a gentleman who helps with this Hawk Mountain sale. In fact, he germinates a lot of the seeds of the rare plants that happen at this sale. So it was quite a pleasure for me to talk with him. And he keyed me in that this sale is happening on the 17th. Very sad to say I won't be able to go there, but there's a list that I included on the bottom, and it has a list of all of the species that are going to be at this sale. It's over 100 species. Some of them are very rare, probably due to my new friend. So if you can get there, it's a great sale. This is where I will be though. I will be at the Green Earth Festival in Phoenixville, again, doing the best that I can to tell everybody that they need to plant natives. Phoenixville is a wonderful place to spread this message. There are a lot of very eager people. They want to be doing the right things. They're looking for the information. We have some great members in Phoenixville who are doing amazing things with their pollinator corridor. So I am happy to be there amidst a lot of people who are doing lots of these good messaging campaigns. I'll be in good company there. So if anybody's going to the Hawk Mountain sale though, let me know and I might give you a shopping list for me. This is another event. One of our members from the Lancaster area, I believe, made sure to email me and ask if I could tell people about this event. And I believe we did mention it last month during the opportunities. It just looked a little different. But sorry, my banner's hiding it. On Sunday, September 18th at the Mannheim Railroad Station, they're having a program led by Linda, who's wonderful, knowledgeable with the Lancaster Conservancy, and Hungry Hook Farm, another wonderful native plant nursery. We'll be having a plant sale there. So if you're towards that area, check that event out. clicked something, not the right thing. Okay. And then the Paw Paw Festival, the date changed. So it's the 24th and 25th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's in York. Admission is free. There's Paw Paw tasting. I think they have a donation collection for events and activities. Their t-shirts and other vendors. That seems like a really great thing. Let me know if you're going. I think I work that weekend. The Pennsylvania Native Plant Society, if you are a member of their organization also, which you should be, I think everybody should be, they're having their annual meeting on Saturday, October 15th, and they have some great speakers lined up. I believe that I was fortunate enough to watch the environmental yardistry presentation at their spring festival, and it was inspiring, and I think it would be wonderful if everybody could see that. I'm not sure by this flyer if you have to be a member or not of the PA Native Plant Society to attend this meeting. It's in person and also virtual, but you have to email, so you could ask them. But if you're not a member, you should be a member because they're doing great things. And then this is the rest of our calendar. We do have a speaker for next month. We have Ben Kessler from Little Bluestem. I'm very excited to hear his presentation. Marc, you're back with us again in November. We can't get enough. And then in December, we have Susan, who's going to talk with us about wild seed collection. I'm going to leave this slide up. I believe it's my last one, just reminding everybody about the native plant opportunities for purchasing in our area. And if anybody has any questions, or if Susan or Audrey could let me know about anybody in the chat, that would be great.
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
So I just got contacted today on August 24th. West Nantmill Township is having a community day, and they wanted a beekeeper to be present. But I explained to her how, you know, beekeeping were non-native agricultural livestock and how we promote native plants and true conservation and dispel a lot of the beekeeping myths out there while providing healthy hive products. She was very interested to hear about the Wild Ones chapter, and that's another opportunity in case you can volunteer and help man the Wild Ones booth. Jesse works that weekend, and we would love to have some members volunteer and spread the word and love about native plants and what truly helps the ecosystem and what is true conservation. So August 24th, Saturday, I think the time frame is 10 or 11 till 3 or 4. If you can help out for just an hour or two or the whole day, that would be great.
Justin, you're saying August. Do you mean September?
I'm sorry, correct, September.
And you said it's September 24th at the West Nantmill?
West Nantmill Township. The location of the township building is somewhere around the intersection of, it's at Elverson address, so it's somewhere around the intersection of 23 and 82, but a little bit south where it crosses over with 401. So I'm not exactly sure if I've been at the location before, but it's roughly the intersection of 82 and Route 401, and it's an Elverson address. And I'll throw out the same the same offer out there. Any Wild One members who wants to volunteer at the table, I'll give you a little jar of hat trick honey, local raw honey, which is very healthy and beneficial.
Excellent, thank you. Hopefully somebody is available to help us spread the word. Donna, you say they have a new disease, laurel wilt. Could you tell me, are you referencing sassafras when you say that?
Yeah, sassafras. We just learned about it at our EAC meeting on Thursday night. It's a fungal disease that's spread by beetles, and it's not good, but we're getting more information.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. I'm not familiar. I'm gonna have to see what I can find out about it.
I can send you a link.
That'd be great. And then if you could also send me the time to look at the link, I would.
With you.
Oh my gosh, I know you are, girl. I know it.
Can you repeat that? What's going on with sassafras? A fungus? I think I missed something.
It's a
Yeah, the disease is called laurel wilt, and it's a fungus that's spread by a beetle.
A native beetle or a non-native beetle?
I can't.
unknown at the moment.
I've read that it's from a non-native beetle, the red bay ambrosia beetle, but you know, if it's still early in the stage, they may have not be fully sure yet.
It results in rapid wilting and death of susceptible trees.
Okay, so now I have to stand guard 24 hours over my beautiful sassafras to keep her safe.
Oh.
Hopefully we'll find out more about that and see what we can do biologically to protect them. Andy shares that he drove past the treeauthority.net nursery the other day, and looking online, he has a lot of natives. Andy, if you're still on with us, where is that located?
That was up near Lake Nakamixon. So I think, what is that? Percy? I don't even know what towns are around there.
Well, I'm gonna see if I can look into it and see. So I'm assuming that it's a lot of natives, but not strictly native. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
But he did seem to, I read his little bio. He's a Temple grad, and I think he was an engineering major, and he's started this nursery, and he did seem very, on the website, very dedicated to native plantings.
Well, I will put our list back up there because I do like to include nurseries that aren't strictly natives. They're trying to do their part to increase the availability of natives. I think it's important that we all are going to these places that are even having some natives, as long as they are producing them ethically, maybe especially if they're seed grown, or if they're getting them from reliable local growers that are growing them responsibly and ethically, local genotypes, so that we support them, let them know the more you do this, the more we will visit you and the more money we will spend with you on these native plants, to help them swing their business model to get even more natives. So that's the biggest reason why this link includes places that aren't strictly native, so that we can help support them and shift the tide into where native plants are sold.
Actually, now that I'm remembering, I believe he actually supplies plants to Redbud and Edge of the Woods, is what he said on his website.
Wow.
And then he also has a delivery, which is, I think, $5 a mile. And maybe he goes 25 miles from where he's located. I can't remember exactly, but it's on his website. But I believe he supplies plants to those two fully native nurseries.
Wonderful. That's great.
What's his name again? What's the name of that nursery?
It's in the chat, but it's treeauthority.net.
Oh, I know who it is. Yeah, okay.
And if you are passionate about locating your local nurseries and swaying their offerings to native plants, Jesse had shared an email with me from the PA Native Plant Society, a campaign to get nurseries on board with eliminating the dirty dozen, which is the top 12 invasive non-native plants in the region. You can contact us, maybe get that email. Maybe it's available on the PA Native Plant Society website, But I've been forwarding that type of information to local nurseries too, and asking them not to sell these particular plants and to consider selling more native plants. And if the consumers, you know, the people, us, if we explain to them, this is what we're looking for, we want to spend our money at your business, but we want you to offer what's most beneficial to the ecosystem, it could really make a huge difference if imagine if everybody in the chapter did that to the local nurseries, the feedback they would get and the results that could happen.
And every time you go and stop by there, ask all of the different people that you know, encounter, so that they know this is a real thing. This is a movement. It's not just a trend or a fad. This is a lot of people asking for these specific plants. I think, yeah, he's right. We can make a difference.
It's a huge catch-22. The businesses want to offer items people want to buy, but people only know their buying options by what is offered. So that's the real crux of the whole native plant situation in the nurseries and the big box stores is that whole dilemma right there.
Thank you for sharing the Tree Authority website there. I'm going to check into that when I can. And if it sounds like I'll be able to add them to this list. And Jenkins Arboretum sells natives all summer, every day. Excellent. Let me put that on the list also. Things to check into. Our list will be 2 pages instead of 1. What a great problem to have. And Susan, I know you had mentioned, and I may get this wrong, but I wanted to let our members know that the way our website is going to have to display upcoming events is going to change, in case you guys are using that as a resource to see what's going on, because we have been trying our best to share organizations with ideas of like mind, so that we can all build each other up and share all of the native plant opportunities, not just what our chapter specifically has to share. That's going to change per national, that we have to show that in a different manner. We can only show our specific chapter events under our events page on our website. So in the future, that will be displayed under the, Susan, remind me where it will be displayed on our website.
They said we should put it on our blog, but that means every time there's a new event, it'll be a new blog entry. And if you want to see something that was posted last week, but it's going to take place in 3 weeks, you have to scroll down through the blog. I just think it's undealable.
Okay.
I don't think we can do it anymore.
So we won't be able to put it on our website. It will essentially be what we have included in our presentation slides for our meetings, and potentially as a list that stays in our newsletter, but it won't be something searchable on our website anymore.
Right, it'll be in the newsletter, and as you said, on the slides, on the recordings.
Mark, yes, I do see Bemerwalds is on our list there. Yeah. And in fact, Bemerwalds was one of the first places that I was able to, when I first started on this native plant journey, it was the first place that I could find mountain mint. And I was like a little kid on Christmas, so excited to load up my cart with mountain mint. But fascinating. It's so funny that you mentioned that. It led me to this. So I just mentioned this gentleman that I was fortunate enough to meet through a next door connection. He is a botanist, and he had reviewed one of the presentations from when we first started the chapter, and I showed a picture of my mountain mint. And when he came over to my house for a yard tour, he said, "Can you show me your mountain mint? Because in the pictures, I don't think that it's muticum like you're listing it as. I think that it's something else." And I was like, "Well, I want you, the botanist, to please come and look at this and tell me what you think." And he came and looked, and he said, I don't think it is Muticum. I think it's a hybrid. And I said, well, I purchased it with the tag that said Muticum, no cultivar and anything. He goes, well, I think that's probably, it's not facetious, that it's just, this is not wild Muticum. So it may have been selected at some point to be Muticum that has been reproduced for the horticultural trade. So it is Muticum, and it's not a cultivar in the sense that it's not cloned or anything. But he said, this is not the Muticum that you would find out in the field. And I was like, that is so fascinating. So it was a really exciting opportunity for a professional to come and check out my Muticum. And that was fun. Donna, I'd love to. If you want to share information about our Chester County Grows event, that would be great.
The West Vincent Environmental Advisory Council was asked to represent Northern Chester County. And it was an event showing how all through Chester County, many groups and people are taking great efforts to make Chester County a homegrown national park and promote biodiversity and follow Doug Talmey's teachings. So it was given at the Chester County Historical Society, and the room was packed for the dinner. And West Vincent and the Euclid EAC and the Westchester Green team and Bondsville Mill presented. And there's just so many people who are planting. And so Bondsville Mill, their goal now is to plant 19,000 plants. So there's just a lot going on all through the county.
19,000 native plants?
Yes. Yeah.
Here. I'm really excited. I hope that they choose a lot of straight species. I think that's kind of our next tweak that we need to make in our discussion. Native, like we have to get off the cultivar bandwagon, or at least swing the percentage, a much higher percentage of straight species, so that we're really loading up that biological diversity and getting those genes swimming around in the pool again instead of limiting them so much.
If you guys are fans of Bondsville Park and you ever visit or you ever communicate with them, do me a favor and just put it in the ear like I have and ask them why they have non-native agricultural livestock honeybees on this, what they want to be a nature preserve. It confused me from the park conception, and I had reached out and tried to find out if they were doing community agriculture, community gardens, things like that on the property, and we're going to have other agricultural livestock. And my message really wasn't conveyed that, most nature preserves, most natural native plant preserves do not allow non-native honeybees because they do have negative impacts on our native pollinators. If you ever go there, give that little feedback from me, because if I'm the only one trying to convey that message, and the Chester County Beekeepers Association is trying to tell them otherwise about all these mythical benefits of honeybees to the environment, only one person doesn't sound as valid as all these native plant enthusiasts just inquiring why they are on site.
Seems like they have a really strong association with the Chester County beekeepers. I was trying to be well behaved, so I didn't say anything on Saturday.
No, the thing is, they don't have that strong of a connection. I'm part of that club. I'm heavily involved with that club. But when I inquired how the club convinced them to let them have non-native agricultural livestock honeybees on site, I was met with very much resistance, because I do love honeybees. I am a bee farmer, but I'm an environmentalist first. And any talks I do, any events we have, it always leads to native plants. It always leads to dispelling beekeeping myths that honeybees are not endangered. They're just agricultural livestock. There's no native honeybees to the entire U.S. continent. We actually don't need them here for anything, to be honest. And it really baffled me after seeing how much they were in love with Doug Towney and his teachings, that they somehow got convinced a teaching honeybee keeping apiary site on premises was a good idea. It is really beyond me, and I've had apparently made several enemies in the beekeeping realms and club inquiring about this.
I think we can do our part to try and mention it, but I think both sides have something to gain that is outside of what we can influence necessarily. So that's where we're going to leave that. Shannon, I agree. The tree tenders class is really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that link. Registration is open, she says, and I know, Shannon, you just recently completed that program, right? Would you like to share anything about that? You just went white. Let's see what happens. Shannon may not be able to turn on her mic. Maybe she's otherwise occupied. And Marc shared the range map for the laurel wilt disease. So all of these things, hopefully we can share the links to fascinating information for us to all be able to look into. I'm gonna close this. Stop sharing. There are all your faces again. All right, guys. It has been a wonderful meeting and a super long day. Shannon, I think Shannon just said something in the chat. All I see is, but the class, sorry, I unmuted, but it isn't working. The classes are wonderful. I'm sure she learned a lot. I think that there's so much to learn out there. I had signed up for the Penn State Woods in Your Backyard program, which I highly recommend to anybody who either has any trees in their yard or is adjacent to or interested in woods that are adjacent to your property. It was a fascinating course to take online, very cheap, came with a very nice textbook that described the importance of small and large forested areas. That's another course that you could take. It doesn't have the hands-on aspect or the education redemonstration that I think the Tree Tenders does, but it was a great course to take. I highly recommend it. If nobody has any other questions, I'm gonna close the meeting for the night. I thank you all for coming. Marc, thank you for your presentation. I look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Marc, thanks so much. It was a fantastic presentation.
A great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. May this rain.
Yeah.
Always leave the meeting running in case folks in the chat